what RBI believes will be India's growth trajectory in FY24. Now, today is the day when we will also get some sense of what government feels will be India's growth trajectory. Could be in line with RBI's estimate of about 7% or therewithal, plus minus a percent here, a percent there, or maybe 7.2 or 7.3%. But all in all, I think not quite in line with what India needs to achieve that growth target of 2047.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be overtly optimistic about India's growth story. But I think a little bit of pessimism or a little bit of realism is also, required right now. Now, when RBI revised its growth projections from 6.5% to 7%, it was in fact discounting the high frequency indicators, and the 7% growth projection was also conservative, to quote Michael Patra. So, it's not that RBI or NSO will come with very, very divergent views. I think you're right. It is likely to be in the range of about 7%, maybe 7.1, 6.9, 7.2, we don't know. But looking at the Q1 GDP growth at 7.2%, Q2 at 7.6%, it seems that there is definitely a case of India conservatively definitely reaching 7%, optimistically breaching the 7% target. This also comes at a time when global bodies like S&P, for example, is still pegging India at about 6.4%. UN is still pegging India at about 6.2%. So I don't know what bubble they are really living in, because with two robust quarters of over 7% growth, I think it is fairly obvious that even Q3 and Q4 being moderate will still lead growth over in the 7% region, right? So that said, the problem really still is that, okay, so the good news first that if India grows at 7% in FY24,
we will still be the third largest economy in the world by 2030.
2030, yeah, I think much earlier than that, because India at 7% growth in FY24 on a base of about 3.73 trillion will easily be a $4 trillion economy. So that is a little bit of cheer. That is something to celebrate. At least it's a good headline figure, if nothing else. But my worry really is that if we talk about this Amrit Kaal and if we talk about India's overall growth vision, development vision, then from FY24 to FY27, the 23 years that we have in between, if India continues to grow at 7% average, there will be some years where we will exceed 7%. But let's not discount certain black swan events or certain policy measures that may not fire over this long period of 23 years, where growth could slip below 7% also. But if you were to keep an aggregated growth of 7%, India in the year 2047 will just about be in the vicinity of a $19 trillion economy. Now, put that in perspective. What is the size of China's economy today? China's economy today is an $18 trillion strong economy. 23 years from now, growing at 7%, if India is a $19 trillion economy, it's actually not great news for India. Currently, US has an economy size of about $26 trillion. We are assuming that while we are in the present day the fastest growing major economy, we are assuming that other economies over this march of the next 23 years will not grow as fast or will not grow, even if they grow at a slower clip than India. The sheer volume of their economy right now, the magnitude of their economy, even at a lower growth, is actually going to continue to compound at a rate much higher than India's. So overall, the economies that we want to compete with, which is US and China, because of their current size being so ballooned, we will find it hard to compete with them.
All right, fair enough. Even if we find it hard to compete with them, what does it actually mean for Indians? For India to be one of the fastest growing major economies in 2024, it augurs well for India, even if we are not competing on a global stage, keeping in line with what our, some of our laggings are, and some areas where India has not done extremely well when it comes to making in India, manufacturing in India, because that is going to be one of the core areas and core focus of the government. But even that, at 7%, it is a good growth rate.
It's definitely a very good growth rate, right? Given the situation the world is in, given the entire world coming out of a health crisis, and then you have two wars at two fronts being fought, it is definitely a good number. But, again, more realistically, if not pessimistically, I would still like to break down the large GDP data into per capita GDP.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the top 10 economies in the world right now, India's per capita GDP is actually the lowest in the top 10 economies. So, at about $2,600 per annum, we continue to be among, the lowest sort of per capita GDP income economies. Compare this to US. US has an $80,000 per capita GDP. China has a per capita GDP of about $12,000. Countries even like Germany and Japan hover between the $30,000 to $50,000 per capita GDP. India at $2,600 is obviously a much smaller number.
All right. So while India is looking to grow at over 7% in FY24, may not be enough to meet its own targets and to compete with other major economies in the world. However, is likely to touch and become the third largest economy of the world by 2030. That is definitely going to happen at $4 trillion, almost at $4 trillion at the moment.
Right.
Could be reaching about $5 trillion by the turn of the decade.
Yeah, I mean a little earlier, maybe by FY28 we'll get there if we grow at this rate.
All right.